Hello, online pipe community. It's Ethan, Parsimonious Piper, and I am together again with Potter Piper and the Dread Tiger. And this week, the Dread Tiger, Sir Richard or Father Richard, is going to be telling us how God called him into the priesthood. With that, Richard, take it away.
When I was a very little boy uh, in Baptist Sunday school, uh, which I just loved, and I still love my Baptist friends and relatives because they did me the huge favor of putting me in a church where it was so important to memorize passages of the Bible. I was put into a church where the stories, the great stories of the Old Testament and of the New were told to us so often. We even told the stories to each other at home so much, really, that they were almost like family stories, very nearly family. I remember when I was very young, hearing the story of Samuel and how that the Lord called him when he was just a boy.
Mhm.
And it was it at that very moment? Oh, it's so long ago, but probably that I began to feel the call. And as those long years, childhood years are long years, it takes Christmas forever. In those long years ago, I gradually became more and more and more interested in the scriptures and interested in the worship of God and and my ongoing dialogue both with myself and with the Lord. I remember hearing also the story of the Holy Apostle Andrew. Now, what was the first thing that Andrew did when he was made a disciple by Jesus? He rushed to find his brother. And I thought to myself, I want to be like Andrew. So when years later, when I joined the Orthodox Church, I took the name Andreas, um, as my chrismation or confirmation name. And all of that time, I had known from the time I was a little boy that I was called. Now, because I studied so much of the Old Testament, I felt that there was something missing from the worship I was offering. The worship that I offered and at the congregations that I was with, the worship that we offered was sincere worship, but it was missing some pieces, and it was missing bread and wine and incense. That is what it was missing. It was missing the worship that God had commanded of old. Now, some will say, well, that was then and this is now. And that's how they deal with the lack of it. But I couldn't deal with the lack of it. And so I entered the Orthodox Church, where they have bread and wine and incense, and a curtain in front of the holy place. And inside the holy place, the table that is the Ark of the Covenant, because there is set on it an ark, which is to say a box, and inside the box is the bread of heaven, the manna, which is the body of Christ, kept in reserve for the sick, for emergencies. On it is kept the gospel, which is the tables of our law. On it is kept the priest's blessing cross, which is the rod of Aaron. The continuity is what drew me there. Well, the congregation that I belong to took a gamble and paid for some seminary for me, and I went. And I was there a couple of years, and that wasn't the path I was supposed to be on. So I left, and I went to a monastery, an Orthodox monastery that belonged to the Greek Antiochian Church, because there are two Antiochian, well, there are two main divisions of the Antiochian Church. One is Greek speaking, and the other is Syriac speaking. And I was in the monastery of the Greek speaking Antiochians, only it was Western Rite, which is really curious. Now imagine, I had been a Baptist. So I wasn't used to liturgical worship until I came into the Orthodox Church. And I went into it and was pretty thoroughly Byzantinized. And then I come out and I go into this Western Rite monastery, and all of a sudden I discover, wow, there's this entirely different, very beautiful, but not at all what I was used to, ancient worship. And we didn't use Latin much. We did some, but mostly English, almost entirely. And I was there for a year, and the prior of the monastery, it was a Western Rite Orthodox Benedictine monastery. I still love St. Benedict. Was on his way down the stairs with the novice master as I was on my way up. And I was going up to tell the father that I didn't think I was in the right place. And they were on their way downstairs to tell me that they knew God had something for me, but it wasn't there, which is certainly a mark of the Holy Spirit. And so I came out, worked in a nursing home for 3 years, and kept to the rule of the monastery as an oblate. And then they had a rule change, and I was released from my oblature. And suddenly I was just kind of, my life changed thoroughly. So I decided to keep things around and be pretty much secular for a while. I was embarrassed by my failure. So instead of going back to the congregation that had so kindly sponsored me, I couldn't face them. I started going to Mass at the Roman Church. And I would explain to the priest that I was Orthodox, but kind of at odds and ends, and they were always accommodating. They always allowed me to receive communion, and I started courting my wife and the woman who would become my wife, and we went to church together every Sunday. And then the time came for us to be married, and I had a friend who was a priest in a small Syrian Orthodox jurisdiction. Small jurisdictions spring up when there are canonical difficulties. And it's not like there are doctrinal disagreements. It's not like there are liturgical disagreements. There are canonical impediments. And a local church, for the sake of survival, will bust a cannon, as it were, and break loose. And they'll be that way for about 3 generations and then meld back in. What it does essentially is provide for the survival of the local church. It's not good, but it generally works out. Well, we asked him if he would marry us, and he said yes, because he had known me for so many years, and he had got to know my intended, and so suddenly we were de facto members of his jurisdiction. Eventually, he was made a bishop, and he asked me, so when was I going to consent to be a priest? I had the book learned, no kidding. And from helping him serve at the altar, I knew the liturgics, I knew the rubrics. And so I said, well, let's get started. And so I was sent to Lexington, Kentucky, to the bishop there, who made me a subdeacon and then deacon the next day. And I came back and I served in the parish of my friend. And then the time came when I was ordained to the priesthood. It was on the feast of the Transfiguration of the Lord in 1991.
Mm.
Now, that's 33 years ago in just a couple of weeks from now. And I have served as mission priest, first in Knoxville, and then here in Kodak in Sevier County
Mhm.
for all of that time. As time has gone by, uh, I have to work a job for money so that I can do this job for love. And as time has gone by, I've seen a goodly number of baptisms, not a great big number of baptisms. I'm not the Apostle Peter. Uh, so a goodly number of baptisms. Unfortunately, my share of funerals, a few weddings, and lots and lots and lots of Sunday and feast day liturgies. So we're talking just, about the calling. I felt it from the time I was a little child. And I know that the route has been circuitous. It's been windy. It certainly wasn't straightforward. But I also know, really with all my heart, that I am where God put me. And that as useless as I am, there has been some benefit to the kingdom of heaven because of it. Even if I have spent the last 33 years just preaching to the birds, what is one soul worth? What is one soul worth? I've brought in converts, of course. I'm not a sheep thief. I have no interest in being a sheep thief. I mean, if you want to come, come. If you want to be one with us, be one with us. My greatest success has been in bringing pagans into the church. There's a lot of pagans in the Smoky Mountains
Mhm.
because the mountains are holy. And people are just naturally drawn to it. I understand that. And if I can, as I have, bring a few of them to Christ, then it's not 33 years wasted. Now, I as of this afternoon, I am a priest in the Archdiocese of the Central United States of the Syriac Orthodox Church. The little jurisdiction to which I belong has come home.
Hmm.
I'm happy to say it means a lot to me. And yeah, maybe their route was circuitous, but they did a lot of good along the way, a lot of good. And they were where God put them. They were where they needed to be. We were to learn the lessons we needed to learn. And I'm just, I'm really glad about all of that. Now, Ethan, Father Brian, I don't know if this has just been too long, rambly, and circuitous.
Not in the slightest.
All
Not
right.
not at all. And in fact, I loved the way you drew that parallel between your own path being less than direct and the path of your congregation as well. Um, yeah, it is so interesting how God draws us and leads us. You know, the path to heaven. You know, they say is straight and narrow, and yet we very rarely wind up on a straight path.
Well, now that word straight there is like straight jacket. It doesn't mean it's a clear shot.
Right.
God knows it's not.
Hmm.
Uh, but it is kind of pinched because we are pressed on every side.
Hmm.
But by God's grace, we'll make it.
Now, I was very curious. I want to jump into a couple of questions. How did an East Tennessee boy raised in the Baptist church, how did you come in contact with the Orthodox Church?
Well, I was given a big bag of books by my eighth grade history teacher. Uh, Man, I really liked, and he liked me too. And a good man by the name of Charles Robert Davenport. And big sack full of books. And they were history, biography, and Russian literature.
Hmm.
And oh man, and my father loved to read too. So this was a benefit to the whole family. But I was the one that got hooked on the Russian literature part. And uh, I could, I caught a glimmer of where I needed to be in reading the Russian literature,
Huh.
especially uh, Dostoevsky's uh, Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah.
There's that argument between Alyosha and Ivan about everything must be forgiven or nothing must be forgiven.
Yeah.
And the answer, God help us. God help us, the answer is everything. Everything must be forgiven. But that's not to embrace universalism.
Right. Now, Dostoevsky certainly didn't.
No, no, no. I read some other of his things too. Notes from the Underground, and The Idiot, with which I identify. But you know, I mean, I read Turgenev's Fathers and Sons, and the biography of Peter the Great by the other Tolstoy, and then some of Leo Tolstoy's short stories. I read. I didn't read War and Peace, which you'd think I'd get around to it,
You
but
haven't
no.
missed much. It's too long.
Oh, well, that's what everybody says. Uh, uh, I enjoyed, believe it or not, I actually enjoyed some of Gorky too, even though he was bitter, which is what his name means, uh, and angry. I understood what he was bitter and angry about, but I grew up poor.
That is, I'll see, a simple gift of books. That's really just that's too cool.
Yeah, yeah. So you know, if there's a kid you love, give them books, and if there's a family you love, give them books, and uh, you'll see wonderful results. It's great.
Hmm.
It's great. It was good for us.
Yeah, I I have read Brothers Karamazov and The Idiot. Those were the probably the two most difficult pieces of fiction that I've ever read because the Russian style with you know
Yeah.
thousands of characters all doing different things at once and trying to keep track of them. I
And
think
it's very circuitous.
yes, and I think
Well,
I wound up reading each of those books about 5 times just to get through them once. But
yeah, yeah.
that is really something else. Uh, Brian, did you have anything?
Well, I thought of the same question of, how does a Baptist boy get to go to the Orthodox church? And you explained it with, um, it seems to be reading the Russian literature. So maybe you could just touch a point on that. The Orthodox Church, in my experience, it's very cultural, and so in other words, uh, as we know in the Western Church, if you know if you walk into any what we call a Western church, even though there's going to be differences, when you walk into an Orthodox church, it's like for a Western Christian, if that's the appropriate way to say it, it's like walking in a totally different world. Um,
Yeah.
so I guess my question is, what experience would you like to share, or what point would you like to share to say, when was that first point to go to that different cultural liturgical experience? However you'd like to share that.
Well, before I ever attended an Orthodox service, I went to talk to the priest, and I said he was a very, very good priest. He was the model of priesthood. What a great, great man. I said to him, Father, I'm interested in becoming Orthodox. And he said, well, there's two things you need to know. All right. We believe in the Holy Trinity. Well, I believe in the Holy Trinity. And we believe in free will. Well, I believe in free will. Father, I had no idea. I said I believed in the Holy Trinity, but I didn't know anything. And as I became more and more and more learning about perichoresis, the way that, which means the dancing together, dancing around, the way that the persons of the Holy Trinity interact with one another, with the absolute completeness of love that can only come from sharing that single essence of divinity that is communicated to the Son and the Holy Spirit, our Father. So, and then free will. I believed in it. It sounded good. I had no idea of the implications, you know, and the evidence of God's almighty love for us that is manifested in his allowing us to say no to him. I didn't know anything. By the way, I do want to say this too. If you can say no to God, you can say no to anything. Don't tell me you can't quit doing what you're doing. You can. So, well, it was, but now, my first liturgy was wonderful. It was very beautiful, Father. And the Psaltis, the cantor, was very old, and he was from the old country, and probably the country part of the old country. I mean, his chanting, boy, was rustic, and there is a beauty in the voice of a person who has grown old in the faith singing the hymns, that you can have the best trained singer in the world and they're not going to be able to hold a match to this old saint whose voice quavers and wobbles, and maybe his ear isn't so good, but he knows all the words and he means every one of them. And there's a spiritual dimension to that singing that you can only hear in the spirit. You're not gonna hear it so much with your outer ear as you do with the ears of your heart. So, I mean, all of these wonderful liturgies, they were all beautiful. They were all beautiful. And that kind of thing was richly satisfying to my soul.
How old were you at that point?
I was 18. And of course, like any other 18-year-old, I was pretty confident that I knew everything in the world. And well, I knew a lot of things that were in my world on the surface, I didn't know much about what was below the surface, but with the help of a good spiritual father, a good confessor, and that was that parish priest. He helped me discover not only uh, that the source of my inner dialogue was actually three sources: me, one from above and one from below. But also how to distinguish, how to manage my thoughts, how to protect myself against temptation. All of these aspects of spiritual warfare. This really good parish priest taught me. And that that was as amazing as the beauty of the liturgy was, that tradition of spiritual warfare and of inner prayer. And it's probably because I didn't I wasn't old enough to get it in my previous church. I'm sure that it's there. I mean, there's Christians, and that's what the Christian life is, isn't it? It's that inner warfare. C.S. Lewis certainly writes about it in the Screwtape Letters. Good job with that, guys.
Well, thanks. He gives, Lewis has such insight into spiritual warfare and the, you know, I was just thinking the other day, the letters that we've been through, and we're halfway through the book, written 100 years ago almost, and just as current today as the moment that he penned them.
Our nature hasn't changed. There is one human nature.
Mm-hmm.
It is a singular human nature. It is a real thing, and it is shared among all human persons. That is why Lewis's writings and Saint Macrina and her brother Saint Gregory of Nyssa and Saint John Cassian and everybody's writings, you know, through all of this time, Saint John of the Cross, Saint Teresa of Avila, the author of Spiritual Warfare, the book. Now there's a fun book. That book was written by a religious, I think he was a friar in the Roman Church. And it was so on point, to borrow a phrase the kids use. It was so on point that the Orthodox grabbed it up and started printing it and promulgating it. Because it's just that full of wisdom and of really good, sound spiritual advice. And that is what Christianity is. It's that fight to run your race that is set before you, to gain the crown of the victor, which so often is a martyr's crown. That's there are saints in the Orthodox Church like Isaac of Nineveh, who was, not to put too fine a point on it, an historian. Now, did he teach the Nestorian heresy? Not that we ever noticed. What did he teach? The spiritual life. He was a great writer about love and how to love God and how to love your neighbor and how to be on guard in your heart. That watchfulness. The thing that has kept me the most in Eastern Christianity is the practice of inner prayer, the Jesus prayer. Let the mind descend into the heart, and there stand guard and pray this prayer. That until you can come to the point where your prayer is no longer words, but is listening instead. That's the purest. That's the purest prayer. He knows what we need before we ever ask him.
True.
And it's good to ask him because it reminds us who it comes from. But
Most
if we
certainly.
will go, but if we eventually learn to just come to him anyway, just to be with him, that is the purest. That's the purest prayer. Well, there.
I was going to say that's actually a wonderful thing for us to wrap up on. Is that inner communion that is priceless, and
Yes.
And quite frankly, for some of us who are caught up in the busyness of the world, so difficult to achieve nearly as often as we would like. But
yes.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I can't but believe that there are some folks out there watching and listening here that have truly, truly benefited from hearing your story. And I hope that many of you will continue to join us as we bounce things back and forth, and as we discover from each other more, both about each other and about who God is, and how his love for us does truly pass any bounds that we could possibly place on it. With that, folks, I'll tell you what I tell you. Light something you like. Let's keep exploring this wonderful relationship with Christ together.